When the Supreme Court first handed down the decision in Roe, just shy of 50 years ago, it's not like it was not controversial when it happened. There were definitely people who were opposed to the Roe versus Wade decision in 1973, in particular the Catholic Church, which had always been staunchly anti-abortion. But it wasn't as controversial in 1973 as today's politics about it might make you think. For example, it was not a particularly controversial decision among American evangelicals. The Southern Baptist Convention, America's largest Protestant denomination, they adopted pro-abortion rights resolutions regularly during the 1970s, including after the Roe decision in 1973, the Southern Baptists. When Roe was handed down in 73, the former president of the Southern Baptist Convention welcomed it and explained why. He said, quote, "I've always felt that it was only after a child was born and had a life separate from its mother that it became an individual person. And it has always therefore seemed to me that what is best for the mother and for the future should be allowed." Southern Baptist Convention. Reactions to Roe versus Wade were also really heterogeneous for a long time between the two political parties. There were plenty of anti-abortion Democrats, and there were lots of pro-choice Republicans. Republican governors were at the forefront of decriminalizing abortion in the states in the 1960s, including the governor of California, a man named Ronald Reagan. In 1967, Ronald Reagan signed into law the most liberal abortion rights bill in the country in California. So it's not that there was not disagreement over abortion or that there weren't strong feelings from various quarters about Roe versus Wade, but it was different. And it specifically wasn't really a politics issue. It wasn't an issue that swayed elections or that was a key part of the two parties' political platforms. And contrary to popular belief, Roe versus Wade in 1973 did not spark some kind of immediate big backlash among conservatives and evangelicals and Republicans. It evolved differently. And it's important to know that today. The anti-abortion movement as an explicitly political project, a movement married to the Republican Party, that had to be deliberately created. It did not organically emerge. And it actually did not happen until years after Roe was decided. I mean, the influential right-wing pro-segregation religious leader, Jerry Falwell, his first anti-abortion sermon was not until 1978, more than 5 years after Roe. Even as late as 1980, when Ronald Reagan, by then, was no longer governor of California, he was running for president. In August 1980, Reagan gave a speech to 10,000 cheering evangelicals in a Dallas arena. And he talked about creationism and the Bible. He talked about how evangelical institutions ought to be able to remain racially segregated if they wanted. That's nice. But even then, he did not mention abortion. The plan to use abortion as a right-wing political organizing tool, to try, for example, to move Catholics to the Republican Party, to give a focal point, a policy focus to right-wing Republican organizing against women's rights. It was a choice for them. It was a project that did not emerge organically. It was something they didn't really start working on in earnest until the 1980s. Ronald Reagan, for example, he personally had to do a U-turn. He had to repudiate the abortion rights bill that he had signed as a California governor when he became the first president to make opposition to abortion a central part of his political identity. His personal transformation on this issue shows the political transformation that was happening in the Republican Party on this issue, too. Pretty soon, opposition to abortion would become effectively an entry requirement for elected officials in the Republican Party. And then pretty soon after that, anywhere Republicans had political power, they would use it to attack abortion rights. The states became laboratories for these policies. It became almost mechanized over time that as soon as one Republican-controlled state would innovate and come up with some new way to restrict abortion rights, all the other Republican-controlled states would then follow. The most restrictive laws allowed to stand by the federal courts would then become the template for all the other Republican-controlled states to try to enact those most restrictive rules, too. Wanting to ban abortion became not just the litmus test question for Republican would-be elected officials. Over time, they made sure it was the litmus test for judges to be nominated by Republican presidents. And at first that was kind of tacit, like everybody knew it, but nobody would admit to it. You know, a wink and a nod between Republican White Houses and conservative activists. By 2016, though, Republican President Donald Trump just made it official. He was known, obviously, for saying the quiet part out loud. By 2016, he was flat out saying it. I will only nominate justices who will overturn Roe. And he did. And so today we have the results of not just these justices ascending to the court. We have the result of a concerted political project that is attached to the Republican Party that started 40 years ago for political reasons. And I know there's a lot to say about the court and the reasoning of today's ruling and the individual justices who did this, and indeed the individual states and what their new laws are and how fast the curtain is coming down. And we are going to do some of that over the course of this hour. But I think to know where we are and to know what's coming next here, we have to get real about who did this and how they did it, because this is part of a political project. This is a 40 years in the making project for a big, well-staffed, well-funded, very radical project of the American political right and the Republican Party. And I say it's very radical on purpose. I mean that both in terms of its aims, we're seeing that today, but also in terms of its tactics. It is impolite to say this, I know, but the anti-abortion wing of the conservative movement and the Republican Party has long had an armed wing, a terrorist wing, that has killed a lot of Americans in the past few decades and set off a lot of bombs for terroristic purposes. And that is terrible and criminal, but it is undeniable that that is part of how the extreme right has approached their role in this issue and how to get what they want on this issue over these past 40 years. That has existed alongside the well-staffed, well-funded, well-organized advocacy groups and think tanks and campus groups. The anti-abortion political project of the Republican Party and the political right has been the central organizing principle for the right's entire effort around the judiciary, one for which there is still no match or mirror on the left. It's a big deal. It's a big, now multi-generational, again, well-funded, tightly organized, and extremely, extremely militant American political project. And I think what's important to see today is that for them, this is not a movement that just got what it wanted and now will go away. This is a movement that they have been building for 40 years that is just now hitting its stride, that is just coming into maturity. I mean, this is a movement that can claim 6 of the 9 members of the Supreme Court. We think of Chief Justice Roberts as the moderate justice among them. But you know what? When he was nominated, part of his bio was that he was the spouse of the leader of an anti-abortion organization. I mean, the anti-abortion political project of the American right is a way of life for people on the American right. It is an industry. It's an employer. It's a big movement that has succeeded now as of today at the first top of the list thing they wanted to do. Why do you think they would stop now?